Okay. Hey, everyone. So I'll be your moderator here. Alex Altman. I'm the COO and co-founder of Validation Cloud. We're a validator and node service company out of Switzerland with some of the lowest latency in the industry. And I'm going to pass it around quickly here for my esteemed panelists to introduce themselves, talk a bit about their companies, and we'll get into it.
Okay. Hi, my name is Will. I'm the CTO at GlobalStake. We provide RPC and validation services from our self-owned, geodiverse bare metal servers. We have presence in US East, US West, and Amsterdam, and we hope to be in Central America and Asia in the near future. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Matthieu. I'm from ConsenSys. We do a bunch of stuff like MetaMask, Infura, Linea, and we also run nodes on Ethereum, and so I'm product lead for ConsenSys staking.
Yeah, hi, I'm Peter. I'm managing director from DAIC. We are a node service provider and validator, especially in delegated proof of stake blockchains. We are located in Austria, and also basically all of our infrastructure is run from there.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. So I think before we get into the topic too deep, which is obviously the future of staking, retail or institutional, I'd like to hear from each one of you guys. How do you actually define retail or institutional, right? Most people have their assets either in their own wallet or with a custodian. How would you actually look at, the consumer in this end?
Okay. So I know there are some gray areas, but my definition of a retail staker would be an individual, maybe a couple, who has their own custody of their tokens or assets, and they're interacting with staking directly on chain. Institutional would be outside of that. I expect some scale. I expect fiduciary responsibility, and in some cases there may be the possibility to maintain custody, but I think in most cases custody is released.
So I don't use the institutional categorization because I think it includes very different users, very different user needs. Fundamentally, I think there's two categories: either the stakers who have ownership of their own funds, or the platforms who can actually drive the staking behavior of their own users. And then within the stakers, you have different categories. Retail could be the ones that have less than 32 ETH, which is the vast majority of Ethereum wallets, for example. And then you have different, can categorize differently between the amount of ETH they hold. And then within the platforms, who can actually drive user behavior. You have every portfolio apps, whether custodial or non-custodial, which include like the wallets, the custody tech providers, the custodians.
Yeah, I think retail investors are typically investors which are less capital than the institutions ones, but they have access, as you said, and are able to move their stake quite quickly. They also have not that risk management, let's say, views as institutionals. So they are on one hand staking on providers which provide service for them. So for example, supporting with tools and so on, whereas the institutionals are basically also because of regulations more seeking, I would say, more serious provider which have audited infrastructure, which are probably regulated and so on.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So in terms of your experience over time, obviously all you guys are in different regions, you're working with kind of different types of clientele. How do you feel that the behavior has changed from a needs perspective, both on the retail and institution side?
Well, if we look at like the ethos of blockchain, it steers towards, custody, interacting individually. But I think if we want to, bring in individuals, that institutional layer helps in terms of bridging traditional finance to, what staking is, one-click staking, It helps actually with, you know, the custody of your assets as well. So institutional is important at this pivot stage where we are moving from what people know as something traditional into maybe in the future something that they may take custody of and responsibility of in the future.
So fundamentally, staking is a ratio between reward and risk. So I think as the market evolves and matures, there's a demand for a better ratio reward-risk. So let's say the platforms or the biggest stakers are actually looking at how does each staking provider optimize the rewards, making sure they have the highest performances, attestation rate, block proposal rate, etc., while minimizing the risk. How can we minimize the risk? We can minimize the risk with certification. Certification is a proof that we have the right operational processes in place, like SOC 2 Type 2, ISO, etc. We can distribute the risk also across multiple clouds, across multiple regions, so that when one server goes down, the entire state of the customer does not stop at performing its duties. So yeah, it's improving rewards while reducing risk.
Yeah, so what has changed, as you said, on the institutional side, I think everything gets more and more professional. We get more and more certifications for node providers, for validators. From the retail side, I think there is also a change coming. Retail investors also get more and more informed about what staking is. They understand better, especially on delegated proof of stake chains, that they should stake to probably the lowest staking commission from the validator, because there are other things important. If you, for example, stake to that kind of validators, it probably comes back to you later when this one is increasing the commission or gets even slashed or falls in the inactive set. And where we see that the community gets more and more informed, and I think the thing, which also changes is that more and more users requesting to stake. I think it's becoming natural that something can be staked.
If I can add two things on the retail market, I think one thing is users have more choice today than you used to have back in the past. We see more and more great projects around liquid staking token, pooled staking that are, it will be interesting to see user behavior. And the second thing is users have more and more gateways to actually stake. In the past, it was they had to go to the staking provider himself. Now there's more, all the wallets, all the exchanges are offering staking as a feature, which also helps onboarding those users into staking.
Yeah, I do see a trend of improvement to the UI of on-chain staking. I do think retail stakers as well have more of a community view. I think validators that are contributing positively to the community can influence a retail staker more than it may influence an institutional staker. And I do take the point of the high availability offerings by, that institutional entities would try to ensure that's there.
All right, with that, we've seen in the, I'd say, Web 2 world, or more of the equities markets, a large concentration of ownership via things like ETFs, BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity, things like that, that have an overweighted ability to influence different companies because of that large ownership, even though it's not really theirs, it belongs to the individual holder of the ETF. How do we avoid that type of situation happening in Web 3 if everybody's keeping their tokens or coins in centralized providers or decentralized providers? And then what's your view on governance when it comes to being a validator and then acting on behalf of, I guess, your constituents in this case?
Yeah, well, a very, very big question. So with regards to ownership and its effect on the network, we stake, right, at the protocol level to secure that network. And there are certain percentages of ownership that can affect that security of the network, right? Like 33% or 66%. And there's, in some other protocols, there are other lower percentages which can affect like an offline slash, right? So these figures are very important, and I think it's monitored by the foundation of each chain, but ultimately it is something that is a point of responsibility. I have seen some institutions just say, give me, and you know, they just want the reward. But there are also some that are more responsible and are delegating out to the community with taking that responsibility to ensure that who they are delegating to, you know, they're technically capable, they're community oriented and stuff like that. So it is a concern. It is something that we all need to take a look at, because at the end of the day, the yield is one aspect of it, but ultimately we are trying to secure the network. I think retail stakers have a little more flexibility in making quick adjustments, because their decisions are not made in a boardroom. Their decisions could be made, you know, through their own bias, or maybe over a kitchen table, you know, depending on, you know, who's the parties involved.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's very, very important for us as a community to educate. Yeah, as you said, stake concentration on various blockchain is very, very critical. Yeah, on the one hand, the institutions are very, very understanding the risks. Yeah, but sometimes this risk of the stake distribution is probably not seen. And then there is the other risk, which comes to delayed governance finding on blockchains. Yeah? So if there is a stake concentration on one validator, and this validator is probably not able to vote, yeah, to use his voting power because of regulations and so on, because he would, let's say, vote for all the institutions, and the institution itself also is not voting, then there is a lot of voting power missing, which means that governance proposals, probably also really important governance proposals, don't go through, and also the development of the blockchain itself, let's say, gets slowed down, gets delayed. So that's a further thing where education is really needed. Yeah.
Yeah. With regards to governance, you know, institutions might actually wall off, in the best case, if they don't participate in governance. Now, if they do participate, they can overwhelm a vote, right? So you know that's one aspect of things. And there are some protocols in which support turnout affects the speed at which, and this is on protocols like Polkadot and Kusama, in which turnout can speed up the outcome of the vote. So, you know, we really want to encourage turnout, and the institutional, at this point in time, walls off those votes.
Centralization risk is definitely a complex topic to address. Because even when people tell, okay, Lido has 33% of network, okay, but behind Lido there are 30 different node operators. Behind each node operator, they are operating on multiple servers in multiple regions. So it's a complex topic to address. There's probably two things you were mentioning for the largest institutionals. Those users are actually incentivized again to stake with multiple service providers, again to reduce the risk towards one single point of failure. And then it's also up to me, up to you, up to all of us to build better products that actually drive adoption towards users. And this is the only way to really decentralize, is to have multiple great products that each attract their own users.
That brings me to the next question here in terms of when you're dealing with institutions specifically. I know security and compliance becomes a big deal. It seems like everybody's here from different jurisdictions and operates within multiple jurisdictions. How do you find that the regulatory landscape has affected the way that you treat, one, retail users and then also institutional users?
Well, so we operate quite out of the US, and we have found that some of our clients are asking to ensure that we are hosting outside of the US. So, that is certainly one direction from an infrastructure perspective. I think regulatory clarity is something that everyone would like to see, and I think it would have certainly a positive effect on bringing more users, more TVL into the overall landscape. So it's right now, I think that uncertainty is also perhaps driving some decentralization, right, from an infrastructural standpoint. But I would like to see regulatory clarity. I think it would be a positive for the entire industry.
Yeah, everybody needs regulation, yeah, everybody needs clarity. The institutional stakers, the retail stakers, but also the data centers or parts of the critical infrastructure. I mean, it could happen, yeah, that because of that uncertainty, is staking allowed or is mining allowed, that some data centers come to the decision to immediately stop some operations. I mean, last year we had that issue. I think you all know what I'm talking about. So it's not only needed for the, let's say, the stake distributors, it also helps, yeah, infrastructure providers and everything. And it's absolutely needed for the next step, yeah, that we bring in more and more people, also from traditional banks and so, yeah.
And in terms of compliance and bringing in new banks or bringing in new groups, how do you guys view and decide to adopt a new chain? And then when you're on that chain, how do you kind of work to grow your own institutional or retail focus?
Yeah, well, I had the discussion just before we came in. So in terms of onboarding a new chain, right, in our case, we don't use AWS or Hetzner, one of those things. So we have already allocated capital, right? We have an expense, fixed operating expenses. So certainly the amount of resource usage that chain uses, we establish a cost, and we also look at a revenue model. Can that, can we get a profit out of it? But there's more to it than that, because we do value relationships. We do see the growth of a protocol, and we know at the foundational, formative level that support is needed. So these things, they are probably, we call them like the intangibles that need to be considered as well. There are some good projects, and we want to see that Web3 vision seen, and there is support required at that core level, right? In terms of bringing in stake to a validator, some of the approaches we're very community oriented. I was hired from the community, right? So I think that's something that's sometimes left out in terms of providing services to the community, to interacting with the community, to know what's going on, and having like a fundamental connection with the project and what they're trying to achieve. I think all of these things lend towards, bringing in new stake. And of course, there are sometimes in which the customer drives that decision. A customer would come and say, hey, we have these assets, we believe it's a good protocol. Can you facilitate this and operate a node for us, because we trust in your technical capabilities?
I can't really answer. We are fully focused on Ethereum. So we took the strategy to be a great Ethereum validator to start. We've not yet looked at expanding to other protocols.
Yeah, so it's a little bit like you said on our side. When we join a network, we set up the nodes. We try beforehand identify if we are able to attract a certain stake, because we are basically focused on the retail investor side. So sometimes, even if we would and we see possibility to enter a chain, we decide against because the existing or the stake distribution, which can be awaited, wouldn't make sense. And then also, yeah, we're starting with creating content, working together with content creators. Yeah, we try to identify how we can help foundations with providing infrastructure there, but providing also other services or helping them to be integrated on our service partners. And yeah, then let's hope for stake.
No, I think also governance has a role because, you know, that leadership is important. And I think retail stakers more would appreciate, and even foundational votes would be inclined towards those who show an interest in the network.
So now that you've decided to onboard a new chain, what would you say is the most important product features when it comes to actually providing the service to both institutional and retail? And then how do those two kind of key product decisions differ from the two sides?
So in terms of institutional, right, certainly reporting is very important. They like to know how their assets are performing, right? They like to know certainly like how can we reach out to you? What if we do see an issue or if we do have an issue, what's your response time like? In terms of retail, I think there's, you know, we roll out a new chain, we do try to maintain a presence, especially with like upgrades. We want our retail clients to be able to ask us a question or know that we exist beyond just collecting a commission.
So the most important product feature, not sure it's a feature, but it's really about how can the user trust you provide them with the best reward-risk ratio, and then everything on top, which is reporting, a nice UI, white glove support, technical support, etc., is also very important. But fundamentally, is your track record in terms of risk-reward ratio.
Yeah, especially for retail, I can confirm the UI is super, super important. And not only the UI, also to describe really the steps. For example, sometimes there need to be funds bridged before. These bridges, especially when networks come up completely new, normally always a little bit hard to use. The UI is not the best, the UX is not tested out. So it's really providing that flow. And also, beside that, providing also information about risks and what to take care. Yeah? Sometimes you're not able to bridge back, yeah, and that is also important to really that the user understands. Yeah, he is not just jumping in a new chain. Yeah, he needs to understand what the consequences are. Yeah.
So I'm hearing a lot about community management and, you know, how to engage with retail and making it easy for everybody to understand how to get involved in governance. In terms of actually working on the back end, how do you guys ensure safety and security from an uptime perspective, from a slashing perspective, and how do you view that?
Yeah, well, from a technical perspective, you know, I think there are a lot of strong minds in this area, right? Key management. It's a question that's, if you meet an institutional client, one of the first things on the list is how do you manage your keys, right? So we certainly try to ensure that there is security on the node itself, security of the seed phrases, right? And accessibility of it. Sometimes when there's a problem, you need to get it quickly. And if there's too complex mechanisms put in place, it tends to make retrieval of certain restoration, like a seed phrase, complicated, right? So speed of recovery is also very important. The risk of high availability, I've heard some providers, you know, speak very highly of clever solutions of high availability, which revolves around cloned machines or cloned VMs and technical ways in which you can go from, one is down, another comes up. But there's a risk, though a very small risk maybe, that you can be slashed through equivocation. So in terms of high availability and stuff like that, we do try to ensure that it is there, but guarding against having two nodes with the same keys. So we will apply the keys thereafter. So from an operational perspective as well, we like to think very optimistically, right? But there are times when things go wrong. And our company, I'm based in the UK. We have staff in the Caribbean. We have staff in the US. And those different time zones help a lot when troubleshooting or waiting for feedback from the devs to deploy a fix across a prolonged period of time. And being able to maintain, being able to stay attentive during those times. So yeah, I'll pass the mic on.
Yeah, most important thing is monitoring everything, monitoring the networking layer, monitoring the hardware, monitoring the application layer, seeing trends. Even with monitoring everything, things can go wrong. For example, we have automated smart scans on our disks, yeah, and sometimes everything is okay, but you see the rate is dropping. So in case of hardware conflict, hardware defects, it's also important to have that for sure available. Yeah, so that is what we also ensure, that minimum or maximum 4 hours, everything can be done. And I completely agree. I'm not a fan, or I am a fan of automate everything, except automating recovery. I think there are great tools out there. I think it can be done easily, yeah, in a quite secure way. But in the end, getting slashed there is too risky, and we do the same. Recovery is only done manually to really take that slashing risk away.
As you mentioned, monitoring and alerting, I forgot to take off pager duty. So if I do get an alert during the presentation, my apologies.
I agree, and just to add one thing, ultimately it's the team you're having, the engineers who are behind it, because they're the one who's doing the magic. So I'm product, I'm sitting on this chair comfortably talking about how to make it the most performance, but ultimately that's your engineering team who's doing the hard work of monitoring, fixing stuff. So
yeah, perfect. So in the last couple months or so, with Ethereum 2 coming out, it's already added a huge amount of potential stake. It's given a whole bunch more access to investors. Retail, I think, has been a little bit left out of that. They've got, liquid staking is pretty much their only option. But how do you guys view, one, Ethereum coming into the ecosystem, but then two, the need for large scalable infrastructure when it comes to Ethereum staking, given the makeup of it?
Yeah, so I do welcome Ethereum staking. I think it's a good network. It has a good model of securing the network. I do think 32 ETH is a bit high, a high entry point for retail stakers. And I do think that models in which like Rocket Pool or the different liquid staking solutions out there is good. I think DVT, that it's something that we have our eyes on, and we are heavily invested in that direction. And I think that could be the future of things. So, just to quickly move on.
Yeah, nothing to add here, basically.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Pardon?
I didn't understand the question.
How do you think that Ethereum, as being introduced, I guess actually we're kind of running out of time here, so we'll do a speed round answer to this one. But as Ethereum's got introduced, it has a very high bar to it, right? So it's basically almost shutting retail out of it. Do you feel like that is something that, based on the size of Ethereum, is an issue, essentially?
Yeah, I think Ethereum staking is accessible to retail through multiple means. Lido is obviously one of them. There's more and more solutions, more and more optionality for users. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time. So thanks everyone for being part of the panel. Thank all the panelists up here. And I guess on to the next one.